What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me on today's episode, Chris Fedor in Chicago after the Cavs' latest win, where they brought home a 139-117 victory thanks to a fourth quarter Cavalanche. It was during a game that was tied with 7 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and the Cavs closed on a 32-10 run. They've now won 11 straight games for the third time this season. They're 51-10. Chris, I had to deal with the last 2 days or the Portland Trailblazers game mainly when they were down by 18. The Boston Celtics were in Boston. They were down by 22. What is going on with this team? The Cavs were down by as many as 15 at one point in this game against the Chicago Bulls that had 10 players on their injury report when it initially came out. What's going on?
It's not good. Donovan Mitchell called it unacceptable. Kenny Atkinson said we have to be really, really careful. I asked Kenny after the game, I said, is it too soon? Is there enough of a sample size to say that this is a bad habit that you guys have developed? I asked Jared Allen the same thing, and they said it's a bad habit, and we've got to break it. They did not go into the locker room and celebrate their 11th straight win. They went into the locker room and they talked to each other about how to get off to better starts. They held each other accountable. The starter said that they didn't do a good enough job of bringing the energy, bringing the effort. In the words of Kenny Atkinson, Ethan, they were sleepwalking through 3 quarters. And you've seen that the last couple of games. And Donovan even said it after the game. He said, hey, look, we're able to overcome these things because we're really, really talented. And we can lock in on both ends of the floor when we absolutely need to. But these kinds of things are going to bite us if we don't fix it. So this is something else that the Cavs have to deal with here down the stretch of the season. I don't want to classify it as a problem, but over the last week or so, it has been a problem, and it's point of emphasis number 1 going into tomorrow's game against the Miami Heat is bringing the energy, bringing the effort, bringing the attention to detail from the very beginning. Because again, you can get away with it against Portland, and you can get away with it against Chicago and against a Boston team that did not have 2 starters. Apparently you can get away with it against that group of Celtics as well. But these are the kinds of things that the Cavs want to avoid. The whole goal here is figuring out how to build championship habits behind the scenes. And Kenny Atkinson said for the team that has the best record in the NBA, this should not be part of their identity. And so they're looking to try and remedy it as best they can.
And Chris, I want to preface this by saying that the Cavs, even though the game was tied with under 7 minutes left, came out and won by 20-plus points, right? That is a great testament to the offense that they have and the defense that they can tap into and the overall depth of the roster, because we knew a majority of the starters didn't play for the fourth quarter, all these different things. But the reality of the situation is this team would have lost the last 3 games last year. We wouldn't be talking about an 11-game win streak. We'd be talking about a 3-game losing streak, right? Against Portland, against Chicago, against Boston. And that is the change that has happened over the year that I've been on this beat, Chris. We went from talking about a team that was not capable of playing with their food, was not capable of seeing a deficit and coming back for it. It was more likely that they would have a large lead and then piss it down the toilet because they would not be able to sustain the level of greatness that they were able to play at. This year is the complete opposite. They played with their food and abundance this year. We talked a lot about how they haven't fell for trap games. Well, they haven't fell for them for all 48 minutes. They fell for them for 36 in a majority of these contests. And this last week has been a great example. And I know that Cavs fans are going to get upset with me for saying that you're not talking about the winning aspect. You're not talking about all these other things. But as Chris mentioned, this is Portland. This is Chicago. This is a
Yeah,
Chicago Bulls team that I don't know if they have Lonzo Ball and Zach LaVine from a couple weeks ago and Io and all these other players like on the floor. This is a different game entirely, and it's still the Chicago Bulls, right? So
yeah,
I don't know, Chris. I agree with the fans, with the Cavs players, and saying that this is a problem that they need to be addressed. But I
yeah.
don't want to blow it out of proportion and saying that this is something that they can't address because we know this Cavs team, if they
Right.
hone in on one area, and it's literally like 1 to 3 areas maximum at a time, this
Mm-hmm.
team can change that dynamic, as we saw with the defense, especially in February, at the drop of a hat.
Yeah, but if we're just talking about tonight's performance, specifically tonight's performance, not good enough. Not up to the Cavs standards. Not not the kind of play that you would expect from the team with the best record in the NBA. Not the kind of play that you would expect from a team that has championship aspirations. And when you start to see like a negative trend developing, you want to do your best as an organization to chop that off before it becomes a quote unquote problem. So I think 3 games is enough of going down early. They trailed for 21 of the 24 first half minutes. It was very, very similar against Boston. It was similar against Portland. Like, that's not up to their own standard. They hold themselves to a higher standard. And I think you saw evidence of that as the season has gone on. And I think, if you were in the locker room tonight following the game against Chicago, you saw evidence of it as well. It just goes to show, though, Ethan, that, they win by 22, they score 139, they score 32 points in the final 7 minutes, and they're not pleased. And that goes to show you that their focus is in the right way. Like, their focus is where it needs to be. They understand how difficult it's going to be to win a championship. And they understand the things that you have to do on a daily basis. They understand the standard that they have to hold themselves to every single night that they play. So when you have a team that just won its 11th straight game and won by 22 points and nearly scored 140 points, for them to be upset with their performance shows that they have the right mentality. They are thinking about the right things. They are focusing on the right things because that was not a celebratory locker room, not at first anyway. As it kind of went on, you had the guys cracking jokes and hooting and hollering and screaming and all those different things, the stuff that happens basically every single night in the Cavs locker room. But first, it was, let's talk business. Let's hold one another accountable. So, yeah, I mean, I think there were individual performances in this game that were really, really promising from the Cavs. Jared Allen was dominant, 25 points, 17 rebounds. Ty Jerome provided a lift off the bench. He was able to get himself to the free throw line. Isaac Okoro, Dean Wade, Javante Green, they showed the kind of athleticism. Look, maybe Chicago is going to be the Cavs' first round playoff opponent. Who knows? But Chicago is nothing. Like, they're a nobody team. And they were missing 6 guys tonight. Really important guys, too. So you don't really have to think about Chicago. But stylistically, they're long, they're athletic, they space you out, they shoot threes, they play fast. Stylistically, it's the kind of team that the Cavs have had problems with throughout the course of this year. That level of athleticism. But guess what? They have DeAndre Hunter now. They have Javante Green, who was really, really good for the Cavs. And it just gives them more options. On a night that they didn't have Evan Mobley, on a night that, they needed a little bit of something from Isaac Okoro and a little bit of something from Javante Green, just to match the style of Chicago. They're able to go to their bench, and those guys are able to come off the bench and be productive. So, yeah, it wasn't a great overall performance, but I thought there were individual performances that were positive from a Cavs standpoint. And at the end of the day, this was another example of just how much depth has been added to this team over the last year, year and a half.
All right, Chris, I want to get into some of the overall stats before we break down the individual performances that you kind of got into there. Obviously, the biggest stat of them all, 51-10, best record in the NBA. Cleveland scored 43 points in the fourth quarter, as we mentioned, which is tied for their second most in a final period this season. Their highest is 47 points on January 25th against the Houston Rockets. You also look at how they fared on the road this season. They're 23-6 on the road, which is the best in the NBA. Their 16th win by 20 or more points, with the most in NBA and team single season history. This is their 18th game with 130 more points, tied for the most in NBA and team single season record. Also, we understand that this is a team that is coming off another extremely important win. But not only to say this, it's even more important because of the game that's coming up tomorrow in Cleveland against Miami, as they have the chance in early March to be the first team in the NBA to clinch a playoff berth, not just
Mm-hmm.
the postseason, playoff berth, which means top 6 in the Eastern Conference. And Chris, we want to get into the individual performances, but being able to clinch a playoff berth potentially on Wednesday in Rocket Arena with their fans, how important do you think that is, and how much of a jump do you think that shows this Cavs team has made from last year or your entirety of covering them since the LeBron era in Cleveland ended to where we are now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that big of a deal. And I think that shows how far this organization has come. And I think that shows just how much the standard has been raised here. Because, yeah, I mean, it's a thing, just like this 11 game winning streak is a thing, just like, 3 separate, at least 10 game winning streaks. That's a thing too. But for the Cavs, it's all about winning a championship, it's all about hanging another banner. And yeah, like part of that process is get to the playoffs, get a locked in playoff spot. If anything, Ethan, being able to, solidify a playoff spot and create so much distance between them and the Celtics, them and the Knicks, them and every other team in the Eastern Conference, it just allows them to operate in what is going to be a grueling march in the way that you would want to operate as an organization that has a big picture plan. So, like, look what's happening around the NBA. Over the last couple of weeks of the season, Kyrie Irving has been one of the highest minute players in the entire league. The burden that was thrown on him as a result of Dallas trading away Luka Doncic, the responsibility that he had, he just couldn't, his body couldn't hold up. Like they were asking too much of him, and he tore his ACL. Um, and when you talk about injuries, yeah, a big part of it's luck or bad luck in this case, but it's also like how much wear and tear a guy has to deal with throughout the course of the regular season, how much workload he has during the regular season, how many minutes he plays during the regular season. And if you look at another guy, it's Tyrese Maxey. He's been dealing with this finger issue, but despite dealing with the finger issue, he's playing close to 40 minutes, and now all of a sudden he's out with a back issue. So it's like, if you're going to play high minutes, it's going to catch up to you. Ask Donovan Mitchell about it last year. So, the Cavs coming into this season and they've got this big picture plan, and they're like, look, we're going to do everything that we can to make sure our main guys are in the best physical and mental condition that they can be in going into the playoffs. We want Donovan Mitchell to be in better shape than what he was going into last year's playoffs. So I think it allows them, because of this cushion that they've built, it allows them. March is tough, man. There's 16 games in 30 days. 10 of those are on the road. So it just allows them to get these random rest nights for Donovan, random rest nights for Evan Mobley. Evan wasn't even in Chicago tonight. He's back in Cleveland waiting for tomorrow's game against Miami, right? I would think that Max is probably going to get a rest night down the stretch. He has his ankle wrapped constantly when he's on the bench. He's got a heating pad around it. DeAndre Hunter might get a rest night. You know what I mean? Because it's all about the big picture with this team. And if you're not chasing wins, if you're not chasing seeding, if you're not trying to climb the standings, then you're able to take these liberties when it comes to the grueling schedule that you have to deal with. So get ready for DNP rest. Basically, I would say the rest of the way for the Cavs, just finding spots. It doesn't have to be consecutively, but finding spots in the schedule that make the most sense to try and get these guys a little bit of downtime and give their bodies extra time to recover and not put as many miles on those tires and not ask them to carry so much of a burden. And when you have the depth that the Cavs do and you have the cushion that they have at this point in time and the fact that they're going to lock up a playoff spot in the near future, it just gives them an advantage that New York can't do this. New York's got to play all their guys. Detroit really can't do that. Detroit's trying to hang on to the final locked-in playoff spot. Miami can't really do that necessarily. Miami's trying to fight for one of those top 6 spots in the Eastern Conference. So it's just a really good situation that the Cavs have put themselves in, all with one goal in mind.
And Chris, I think that's a great point because of not only the minute allocation that's been something that Kenny Atkinson and everybody has talked about since the very beginning of the season, since the beginning got the job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now we look at today's game, and there were only 2 players that played 30 minutes, right? For the Cleveland Cavaliers, Jared Allen and Darius Garland. And we've seen
like 10 seconds, they played 30 minutes.
Come on. That's what I'm saying. And it's not like my favorite thing is trying to figure out after games how much we're going to round up. How are you going to round up the 29 to 30 or whatever? It's like 30 minutes and 10 seconds. I appreciate that. Don't have to do no kind of math on my end. I look at it and I get to spew nonsense, right? But Donovan Mitchell played 28 minutes, rounded up. Max Strus, 25 minutes, rounded up. DeAndre Hunter, 24 minutes. Those are the most used players on this team. And they're nowhere near some of the other minutes that we talked about. Jalen Brunson, OG Anunoby are guys. Tyrese Maxey, Josh Hart, of course. Mikal Bridges. Obviously, I'm naming a lot of Knicks players because those are the guys that have been playing the most minutes this season. Thank you, Tom Thibodeau. But I don't know if we can go past this and continue to talk about it. And I like highlighting the guys that don't get a lot of shine, especially on a team that's 51-10. It feels hard to do that. But Jared Allen's one of those players, right? Jared Allen is a guy that doesn't get a whole lot of love. But this season, there's been 2 guys to record 20 or more points, 15 or more rebounds, 90% or from the field or better in a game this season. It's Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. And then there was this other ridiculous stat that I saw posted by Cavs Notes on X, formerly Twitter, saying that tonight Jared Allen joined Wilt Chamberlain as the only players in NBA history to have 3 or more games with 25 points or more, 15 rebounds or more, and shoot 90% from the field. Jared Allen's done it 3 times in his career. 2021 against the OKC Thunder, 2021 against the Houston Rockets, and tonight against the Chicago Bulls. So I think you just talk about a guy that, and I want to get into the behind the scenes of it because obviously that's what this podcast is best at, especially since we do have the man, the myth, the legend, Chris Fedor with us. Chris, I heard through the grapevine that Donovan Mitchell might have plugged something in Jarrett Allen's ear to get him to play to a different standard, to a different level. We know every time you ask Jarrett Allen, he says, I try and play hard every night. But for
Mm-hmm.
some particular reason, not just a double-double was on his mind tonight. 15 and 15, 20 and 20 were on
Yeah.
his mind. What do you know about all that?
Well, Donovan is just somebody who has found ways, to get through to Jarrett. And the message that Donovan delivers to Jarrett, oftentimes it resonates because he just knows how to talk to him, and they've built that kind of relationship. So, Donovan recognized the advantage that Jarrett had inside going into tonight's game. Vucevic didn't play. It was Zach Collins. It was, at times, Matas Buzelis on switches. It was Jalen Smith. So advantage Jarrett Allen. If he's one of the best centers in the Eastern Conference, and he is, this was going to be a favorable matchup for him. And on a night that the Cavs didn't have Evan Mobley because he was resting, a lot of the defensive responsibility was going to fall on Jarrett, protecting the paint, protecting the rim, doing all the things that make Evan Mobley a defensive player of the year frontrunner. That responsibility was going to fall on Jarrett. Finishing defensive possessions with the rebound, that was going to fall on Jarrett. Being more of a focal point on the offensive end of the floor and having a higher usage rating because, the third leading scorer wasn't out there. That was going to fall more on Jarrett. So Donovan just knew what kind of game it was going to be. And he said to Jarrett, he said, how about 15 and 15? How about 20 and 20? Hell, how about 25 and 25? Like just challenging him to be the best version of himself, challenging him to bring it to a different kind of level than what the Cavs have needed, especially on the offensive end of the floor. Because I think the Cavs also recognized that Chicago was going to defend them a certain kind of way, and those pocket passes were going to be there. And it was going to be up to Jarrett to make those floaters, make those finishes around the rim, work his way to the free throw line, and all those kinds of things. And credit to Jarrett, he answered that. He scored 9 points in the fourth quarter. He was instrumental in basically waking the team up in the fourth quarter. He was pounding his chest and he was roaring at the top of his lungs. And that's the kind of guy that, Donovan challenged him to be before the game even started. And you could see that Jarrett responded to that. And I asked Jarrett, I said, like, what is it about Donovan that, allows him to get through to you in a certain kind of way? And Jarrett said the most Jarrett thing imaginable. He said, Donovan's just a great guy, and I like him a lot. So I guess all it takes is being a really, really good teammate and being a great guy to get through to Jarrett. And Jarrett even made a point. He was like, not to say that Kenny Atkinson's not, but it was funny. Um, but it was a great game by Jarrett. And, those are the kinds of games that you need from him when Evan Mobley's not out there.
And a shout out to Max Strus, right? 5 assists plus 26. We understand that he probably, outside of Donovan and Darius, obviously, but he probably has the best chemistry when it comes to that pick and roll, pick and pop situation with the two bigs, Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. He had 5 assists tonight. He was a plus 26 on the floor. And he was just getting up and down and doing what Max Strus does, causing chaos and being chaotic, even though he only ended the game with 11 points. But that's the kind of productivity that you need from guys like Max, is knowing their role, but also being able to use your gravity that you already have attached to you and utilize that to not only create space for yourself, but also for the big man, and knowing that you have to focus in on Jarrett, especially when Evan's not out there.
I think it shows a lot of stuff from the Cavs, Ethan, because DeAndre Hunter just didn't have it tonight. It seemed like he was a step or two slow. I watched his pregame workout, and he wasn't making nearly as many shots as what I've seen from him. Most of the times, he just goes out there and he does a pregame workout or he does a post shoot around workout, and the dude just like doesn't miss at all. But, like, he had an off night. He just wasn't great. But it shows that Kenny doesn't have to push it. You know what I mean? Because there are other guys that he trusts, there are other guys that he believes in, and there are other guys that have proven themselves worthy of getting minutes. So on a night that DeAndre just doesn't have it, he was the only starter to score in single digits. What a luxury it is for somebody like Kenny Atkinson to just dust off Javonte Green, who started nearly half the games for the New Orleans Pelicans this season. And Javonte provides a spark coming off the bench. 11 points, 4 of 5 from the field, 2 of 3 from three-point range, active on the glass, in the passing lanes, making good decisions when he had the ball in his hands. And then, you've got Isaac Okoro, who made some things happen while he was out there as well. So it just goes to show, like, all the different options for Kenny that he has. And it shows the depth of this team that, maybe in another situation, a team just would have kept pushing DeAndre and they would have just put him out there at the start of the fourth quarter or something along those lines. And they probably would have gotten his workload up close to 30 minutes because, like, that's what's been happening. And that's the kind of player that he is. But on this team, you don't have to push it that kind of way. You can read the room, you can read the game, and you can say to yourself, honestly, DeAndre doesn't have it tonight. He's not at his best. How about Javonte? Or DeAndre doesn't have it tonight. He's not at his best. Let's lean more into Max Strus. Maybe the other game against Boston, that was a DeAndre game. It wasn't a Max Strus game. But this one feels more like a Max Strus game because the things that he's doing are helping us more than what DeAndre is doing. Or maybe this is an Isaac Okoro game instead of DeAndre. And then, this all goes back to these guys accept those things. Jared Allen didn't finish games in back-to-back for the Cavs, right? 2 in a row. And it seemed like we were headed down a path where Jarrett was just going to have to accept that. He didn't pout. He didn't show any issue with that. He gets a bigger opportunity tonight with Evan Mobley back in Cleveland. And Jarrett just does what Jarrett does. You know what I'm saying? So, like, there's a collective buy-in with this whole organization, with everybody on this roster, that is just, when your number's called, try to make the most of that opportunity. And it's all for the greater good. And sometimes when it comes to winning a championship, it means sacrificing minutes, sacrificing shots, sacrificing roles. And, DeAndre's not going to have a night like this all the time. But when he does, to have more playable wings at your disposal, that you don't need to push it with DeAndre, I think that was something that was pretty important out of tonight's game.
In-game adjustments, Chris. Something that we raved about when looking into the potential candidates for the next head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers, and Kenny Atkinson became an option, right? And this is not to bash on J.U. Bickerstaff, but we know that if the fourth quarter came around last season and they were down or the game was tied, the starting unit was going to be on the floor.
Yeah.
They were going to play 5, 6, 7 minutes. If they didn't get back to where they needed to be, they're pulled, the reserves go in, and the game is over, right? This time, and my favorite thing about this was it wasn't, hey, Javonte, we need a spark in the fourth quarter. Get out there and show us what you did with the New Orleans Pelicans, even though you haven't played with us in 3-4 games, right? It was, hey, first half minutes, get acclimated, see where you feel comfortable, and then when we get to a time where we might need you, then you get the chance to feel comfortable in your own skin, in the flow of the offense. And it was clear that Javonte Green is still learning the different schemes, the different principles. And not everybody's going to be DeAndre Hunter and come in and say, okay, I got it, like the top of a hat, right? Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
DeAndre Hunter also had a cheat code in Ty Jerome being on vacation with him and being able to go through different sets on those different conversations. But Javonte Green then got to acclimate his own self, has been in practice, has been working out with the Cavs and all these different things, and didn't really do nothing for the first 3 quarters. He had 1 point, right? And in the fourth quarter, he has 10 of his 11 points. He's perfect from the field, right? This is the
Mm-hmm.
difference in what we're seeing in the coaching mentality of this team. And again, this is not me bashing on anything. This is me just bringing up a point and comparing season to season how this team is different from what we've seen in the past. And obviously, Kenny Atkinson has made some mistakes this year, but this is another push button that feels like he did it at the right time when it allows a player that needs extra run and needs extra opportunity in front of and with players on the floor to get a chance to showcase his abilities, not only to the coaching staff, but also to the teammates around him. That's also something that Javonte Green said after
Yeah.
today's game, is that he's getting acclimated, right? And he's feeling good. But he's still getting to know everybody on this team. He's a quiet, reserved kind of guy. If you know him, you're going to talk
Yeah.
to him. If you don't know him, he's going to stay and do his own little thing. But Chris, I wanted to end this podcast with this question to you. I know Donovan Mitchell, in your interview with Ty Jerome after the game, was kind of mouthing in the background about the 6 man of the year conversation and how him and DeAndre Hunter need to be 1 and 2 in this conversation. What was that all about? And did you actually get to ask the question of Ty Jerome about the 6 man of the year candidacy and race?
Yeah, it's funny that Donovan brought it up because one of the things that I did before tonight's game against Chicago is I just looked up the odds for 6 man of the year because I was curious where Ty was. And obviously, I did a story on Ty earlier this morning about can the Cavs re sign him? What kind of contract can they offer him? And it all ties into this is a guy who could be in the 6 man of the year conversation. This is a guy who has been an integral piece in the Cavs becoming the best team in the NBA. He's going to get paid in a big way this offseason. He deserves that. He's earned that. And if he wins 6 man of the year, that price tag's only going to go up. So I was curious from my own perspective, all right, where does he fall in 6 man of the year odds? Vegas doesn't know everything. They can't predict everything, but they're pretty darn good at this sort of thing, forecasting it. And I think Ty was fifth or sixth among all the candidates in 6 man of the year. And it's like, I just think we're at a point right now, Ethan. As a voter, I've been trying to research this as much as possible. I've talked to as many people about this as possible. So it was something that I was going to talk to Ty about either on camera or off camera, just the 6 man of the year thing. But when Donovan just made it known that, hey, like, Ty, talk yourself up. DeAndre, talk yourself up. I was I was already going to have a conversation with Ty about it. So I just felt like, okay, I'm going to give you the platform. And I said to him, I said, if you had to make your own case to be 6 man of the year, what would you say? He said, that's not my job. so Ty, so Ty didn't really want to pump himself up. Ty didn't want to go down that road, but he did say that for him, it would be really, really cool if either him or DeAndre won it. But it's all under the guise of winning games and winning a championship. And if you're successful from a team standpoint, chances are there are going to be some individual accolades that follow that as well. Um, in saying that, that's what Ty said on camera. In saying that, that's what Ty said to the media. But we know these guys. We've been around them long enough. And NBA players are prideful. NBA players have egos. Ty wants 6 man of the year. There's no question in my mind that he wants 6 man of the year. And there are people inside this organization and inside that locker room, players as well, that do not understand how Peyton Pritchard is the favorite for 6 man of the year. They do not understand it at all. They have asked me privately as a voter, like, to explain it to them, how he's number one. But the truth is, it's March 5th, and I think this is one of the more open awards that there is. And I think it's a 5-player race. I do. I think it's both Cavs, DeAndre and Ty, Naz Reid, the winner last year, Malik Beasley, who is shooting the crap out of the ball for Detroit. He's like the only reliable player that they have coming off the bench, honestly. Who else is there? Marcus Sasser? Ron Holland? Really? I mean, he's the only reliable player that Detroit has coming off the bench. And then Peyton Pritchard. And there's time. There is time for Ty Jerome to continue to climb. There is time for Ty Jerome to show that he should be more involved in the conversation for Sixth Man of the Year. So I don't know exactly why Donovan singled me out and kept saying, Chris, ask him the question. Chris, ask him about Sixth Man of the Year. Chris, ask him about Sixth Man of the Year. I was working on a different story. Like, that was one of the stories I was working on, but I was also working on the whole get off to terrible starts thing and how they're planning to remedy that. But when Donovan kept saying over and over and over again, I said, okay, I'm just going to give you the platform to try and talk yourself up if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to make your case. Because like I said, that was a side story that I was working on as well. It just wasn't as pressing as Donovan tried to make it.
For those subtexters that like to give me and Chris a lot of little stuff on the behind the scenes, especially when Chris says that players called him out by name, saying Chris. No, go back and watch the post game video. Donovan Mitchell is in the background calling out Chris, saying, "Ask the question, ask the question." Like, I'm telling you, bro. Also, the other thing that has to be noted when it comes to this Sixth Man of the Year conversation is something that we've been talking about all year when it comes to Cavs players, and two in particular, is Ty Jerome probably now has a better chance of 50, 40, 90 than Darius Garland does. One, because he drives to the lane a whole lot more and is looking for contact rather than Darius getting his floaters up. Ty Jerome is sitting at 12.1 points per game while shooting 51.1% from the field, 44.1% from deep, which is insane, and 89.7% from the free throw line. He hit 9 free throws tonight. And Chris, I just think it's important that we note that this conversation is coming out against a player in Peyton Pritchard who's averaging 13.9 points per game, 47.2% from the field, and 41.6% from deep as well. So there's legitimacy to each argument, but when you look at the Cavs and what they have going on, Ty Jerome definitely is trying to make his stand. And I think the answer to your question when you say egoless basketball, but everybody still has an ego, I think the one player in the NBA that it would be happy with Ty Jerome getting the award over him would be his best friend in DeAndre Hunter. And he said that publicly, even if it is in joke, in jest. I think that would be the one guy that would be okay with not getting Sixth Man of the Year if his best friend got the award instead.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, Ethan. When it comes to Sixth Man of the Year, you're not going to dismiss Peyton Pritchard. You're not going to dismiss Naz Reid. You're not going to dismiss Malik Beasley. There's a case to be made for every single one of those guys. It's a strong case to be made. There are 100 people that vote on this thing, and not everybody values the same stuff. Not everybody sees it through the same lens, right? So one thing that matters to me may not matter to somebody else. One thing that matters to somebody else may not matter as much to me. So all 5 of those guys have a strong case, and that's why it's going to be complicated. You only put 3 names on your ballot, so it's not like you can put all 5 there. But if somebody were to say, I'm voting for Naz Reid, I'm not going to be like, What a ridiculous vote. There's no case to be made that way. This isn't a couple of years ago where some dodo voted for Andre Drummond because he led the NBA in rebounds, despite the fact that every single one of his defensive metrics voted for him for Defensive Player of the Year, despite the fact that every one of his defensive metrics said that he was a terrible defensive player. Like, that's not the case here. There are 5 guys. They all have a strong case, including Ty, including DeAndre. There is something that the Cavs are going to run into, though. There is a reality of this whole thing. And it's something that Cavs players have run into in the past. We talked about it last year with Defensive Player of the Year. People could not figure out who was more important to the Cavs' defensive success between Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. So they went with neither one. Sometimes that happens. So DeAndre, Ty, they might take votes from each other. It might be hard for voters to say, all right, like, who's the more important one coming off the bench? Who's the one that the Cavs can't live without? How much do we consider what DeAndre did with the Atlanta Hawks coming off the bench? You know what I mean? So I think we could run into a situation with voters where they just don't know the answer between Ty Jerome and DeAndre Hunter. And rather than putting 2 Cavaliers in the top 3 because you only get 3 spots, they're just going to have to pick one of them. Or they're going to pick none of them. And they're just going to go with Nas, Peyton Pritchard, and Malik Beasley because they can't figure out the answer to the whole Cavs 6-man thing.
Okay, I think that is an interesting topic that we will definitely be getting into more as the season progresses. Again, this is just being recorded at 1:30 in the morning on March 5th, but we got so much more to get into.
12:30 where I am. I'm nice and fresh.
Yeah, don't talk to me.
Hashtag Central Time.
1:30. Thank God there's no shoot around tomorrow. Yes, sir. Woohoo! Anyway, yes. I will see you guys after the Miami Heat game tomorrow night. It may just be me, maybe me and Jimmy. Come and find out. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can send in your questions for our weekly Hey Chris episode, and we are going to need those for later in this week. So sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast. It's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.